fear doesn't scream anymore. It whispers through your caution, your overthinking, your silence. You call it anxiety, but Machiavelli would call it obedience. He once said, "Men obey more readily those who inspire fear than those who inspire love." But what happens when the one you fear is yourself? Every anxious thought, every hesitation, that's power, quietly shifting away from you. So ask yourself, is your fear protecting you or training you to submit? Machiavelli understood something most people still refuse to see. Fear doesn't need an army. It only needs your imagination. Back then, rulers created fear through punishment. Now, society creates it through perception. You no longer fear death, you fear disapproval. You no longer fear exile, you fear embarrassment. And the effect is the same. You stay quiet, you stay small, you stay controllable. Look closely and you'll see the new kingdom. Its walls are invisible. Its guards live inside your chest. And every anxious heartbeat is a warning bell you've been conditioned to obey. When you hesitate before speaking, when you downplay your worth, when you avoid eye contact to appear harmless, you're not protecting peace. You're practicing surrender. Fear doesn't announce itself as an enemy. It presents itself as reason, as caution, as maturity. That's why it wins. Machiavelli once wrote that a ruler must appear compassionate, even when his heart is made of iron. Modern power learned that lesson well. It doesn't command you through cruelty, it seduces you through comfort. It whispers, "Don't risk it, don't stand out, don't lose control." And you mistake that whisper for wisdom. You think your anxiety keeps you safe. But safety isn't freedom, it's containment. The cruel truth is this: every time you obey your anxiety, someone else gets stronger. Your boss, who knows you won't say no. Your partner, who senses your guilt. The system, which profits from your constant self-doubt. You think you're being careful, but carefulness in excess becomes captivity. And captivity, when disguised as stability, becomes lifestyle. That's how fear modernized itself. It no longer needs to threaten you. It just needs to convince you that peace means compliance. Machiavelli would have admired this evolution. He wrote of princes who ruled through perception, those who didn't need force, because their people policed themselves. That's you, now. The anxious mind is the perfect subject, always alert, always obedient, always one apology away from surrender. And here's what makes it dangerous. You think your anxiety is private, but it leaks through posture, tone, and timing. People sense it, they adjust, they lead you without asking. Power doesn't chase the anxious, it waits for them to come closer. You were taught to manage anxiety, breathe, cope, survive. But no one taught you to question its loyalty. Who does your fear serve? When your heart races before speaking the truth, that isn't your body malfunctioning. It's your conditioning trying to preserve the hierarchy. It remembers that in every system, family, job, or empire, silence maintains order. And your nervous system learned to protect that order, even at your expense. Fear doesn't defend you from harm. It defends the structure that keeps you compliant. Most people never realize how power uses emotion as architecture. Love binds. Shame silences. Fear maintains. That's the trinity of control Machiavelli observed in palaces, and that psychology now replicates in daily life. Your anxious thoughts aren't random, they're rehearsed reflexes. The body has memorized submission so perfectly that rebellion feels like danger. You think you're being moral, but morality, without confidence, becomes obedience. There's a reason calm people seem powerful. The world reacts to their stillness like gravity, They don't speak faster when questioned. They don't apologize for existing. And the anxious, sensing their stability, instinctively defer. Power, at its core, is nervous system hierarchy. Whoever controls their fear controls the room. So when you feel anxiety spike, remember, that isn't just emotion. It's a signal that control is slipping away from you. Breathe, not to calm down, but to reclaim command. Machiavelli once said that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands. In today's world, judgment isn't visual, it's psychological. People read your tone, your micro-expressions, your pauses, every stutter, every self-correction, every nervous smile. It tells them whether you're prey or peer. And once they decide, they don't need to dominate you. They simply let you dominate yourself. Here's the paradox you must see. Anxiety feels like awareness, but it's actually distortion. It doesn't show you the truth. It magnifies the threat. It turns ordinary moments into potential humiliation, neutral faces into silent judgment. And in that fog, control slips through your fingers. You don't lose to others. You lose to your imagination. That's how fear rules now, not through pain, but through perception. Machiavelli wrote for princes. But if he walked among us, he would study the anxious. Because anxiety is the modern proof that his doctrine survived. It's fear, domesticated, elegant, invisible, self-sustaining. The question isn't whether you feel it. The question is whether you'll keep letting it serve someone else's throne. Because every time you hesitate for the sake of peace, you give power permission to own your silence. Machiavelli believed that every kingdom falls the same way, from within. Not because of invading armies, but because of comfortable lies. And if you look honestly, you'll see the same collapse happening in your mind. Fear is the invader you invited. It knocks gently, offering safety. But once it enters, it never leaves. You tell yourself, I just don't want to mess things up. But that thought is not humility, it's submission disguised as self-awareness. Because deep down, you know this. Every time you surrender to anxiety, you trade clarity for comfort. The world rewards calmness, because calmness looks like control. And fear looks like instability. It's the easiest way to disqualify yourself from your own potential. You see it happen every day. The loud ones are listened to, even when they have nothing to say. The steady ones are trusted, even when they're wrong. The anxious ones? They're labeled kind, nice, sensitive, polite words for disarmed. Machiavelli would have smiled at that. He once wrote that power doesn't need to destroy you, it just needs to make you predictable. And anxiety is the most predictable force of all. Here's the part no one dares to admit. You can't be both safe and powerful. Because power requires risk, and fear forbids it. Power requires silence used as a weapon, and fear fills silence with apology. When you live under anxiety, you don't think, you react. You wait for permission. You chase approval before decisions. You craft every word to be digestible, never realizing that the need to be understood is the very chain that binds you. Fear has trained you to think in loops. You rehearse, you revise, you retreat. While the world moves in straight lines, Machiavelli taught princes to rule by anticipation, to act before emotion clouds strategy. But you do the opposite. You wait until emotion gives you permission to act. You wait until you feel ready. And by the time you do, power has already passed you by. Fear tells you that caution equals intelligence. But what it really builds is hesitation, a delay that power exploits. In every meeting, every argument, every opportunity, the person who decides faster dominates. And the anxious always wait too long. You think your fear keeps you humble, but humility, when driven by anxiety, is just preemptive defeat. You lower your tone before anyone asks you to. You soften your presence before anyone challenges you. You call it kindness, but it's camouflage, a disguise for the terror of being seen. Machiavelli would call it what it is, strategy gone wrong. Because when your desire to be liked outweighs your desire to be respected, you've already lost. What they don't tell you is this: anxiety doesn't want peace. It wants control. It doesn't calm you. It convinces you that only control can calm you. So you analyze everything: the pause in someone's text, the glance during a meeting, the tone in a single word. You scan for danger that isn't there, and in doing so, you become the very tyrant Machiavelli warned about, not ruling others, but ruling yourself through paranoia. Fear doesn't need an external oppressor. It thrives when you become one. In a world built on appearances, fear becomes performance. You smile when anxious. You compliment when threatened. You nod when you should challenge. And every false gesture becomes another brick in your invisible prison. You think you're surviving, but really, you're rehearsing your captivity. Machiavelli would have written this into a handbook if he'd seen our era. That the most efficient kingdom is the one where every citizen polices their own emotions. And the most efficient ruler doesn't even need to exist. There's a moment quiet, barely perceptible, when fear stops being protection and becomes identity. You no longer say, "I feel anxious." You start saying, "I am anxious." That shift is everything. Because now, fear doesn't just visit you, it defines you. It shapes how you love, how you trust, how you speak, and worst of all, how you see yourself. Anxiety teaches you to view confidence as arrogance, boundaries as coldness, and calmness as indifference. It reverses your moral compass. It turns strength into sin. But here's the paradox. Fear thrives on care. You fear because you care what people think, how they feel, what could go wrong. And power feeds on that care, because the more you care, the easier you are to corner. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good, not to be cruel, but to stay effective. And that's the lesson you've avoided all your life. To be effective, you must learn how not to be anxious. Not by suppressing fear, but by starving its purpose. Fear can't survive where there's nothing left to control. You've mistaken sensitivity for morality. You've confused self-doubt with humility. And every time you call your fear empathy, power grows stronger. Because the truth is, anxiety doesn't make you kind. It makes you compliant. And compliance is the currency of every manipulative system that's ever existed. Machiavelli believed that fear is a tool, not a curse. The difference is who holds it. When others wield fear against you, it enslaves. When you wield fear consciously, it informs. The moment you observe your anxiety instead of obeying it, the balance shifts. You stop being the subject and become the strategist. And that's when power begins to notice you differently. Not as someone to mold, but as someone to respect. But before you can reach that state, you have to see fear clearly, not as an emotion, but as an empire. An empire you built unconsciously, brick by brick, thought by thought. Every what if is a soldier. Every maybe later is a wall. And every sleepless night is the cost of your obedience. To dismantle it, you must first admit you've mistaken anxiety for awareness. And awareness without courage is self-destruction. Machiavelli would say, you cannot rule what you fear. And that includes yourself. Until you confront the way your anxiety betrays you, you will always serve something unseen. an invisible prince sitting in the throne of your nervous system. And that's how fear wins. Not by overpowering you, but by convincing you that it's safer to lose. Machiavelli once observed that power never wastes cruelty, it refines it. And if he were alive today, he'd recognize anxiety as the most refined cruelty of all. Because it doesn't wound the body, it conquers the mind. Anxiety is control through anticipation. It keeps you living in tomorrow, so you can't act in today. And every system of manipulation, whether political, romantic, or digital, feeds on that time gap. Fear delays you, and in delay, you become governable. Here's the psychology behind it. When your brain detects uncertainty, it activates survival circuits that blur logic and heighten emotion. You become hyper-attuned to threat, but blind to proportion. A raised eyebrow feels like rejection. A delay feels like danger. You begin to negotiate with imaginary disasters. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. The same machinery that once helped you avoid predators now makes you avoid confrontation. Machiavelli would have called it a perfect design, because the best way to control a person is to keep them fearful of losing something they never had to begin with. Most people think anxiety is random. It isn't. It's cultivated. Every culture, every system, every algorithm trains you to depend on external approval and then weaponizes that dependence. The moment your peace relies on how others perceive you, you become profitable, predictable, and programmable. Fear has gone digital. It's measured in likes, filtered through comparison, and disguised as connection. You scroll not for pleasure, but for reassurance, proof that you still belong. And belonging, as Machiavelli knew, is the modern form of fealty. The brain doesn't understand modern power, it only understands threat. So when someone withholds attention, affection, or validation, your mind reacts the same way it would to physical danger. It releases cortisol, tightens your muscles, hijacks your breath. You don't think clearly, you comply instinctively. And that's where the manipulation happens. Not in lies, but in the timing of your anxiety. The more anxious you are, the easier it is for someone calm to redefine reality. They can say, "You're overreacting," and your body will believe them. They can say, "It's not that deep," and your nervous system will surrender. Because fear doesn't ask for truth, it asks for relief. And whoever offers that relief owns you. Machiavelli once wrote that the wise ruler must appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, but be ready to act otherwise when necessary. Now, that principle has been rewritten into psychology. Your mind, too, appears humane, compassionate, cautious, kind. But beneath that civility lies a primitive ruler obsessed with survival. Anxiety is that ruler's favorite tool. It manipulates empathy into obedience. It tells you to care so much that you forget to choose yourself. That's how fear hides in kindness. It makes you serve others to avoid the terror of being disliked. It turns compassion into submission. Here's what they don't tell you. Anxiety is not just an emotion. It's a governance model. The anxious mind runs like a totalitarian regime. Constant surveillance, no freedom of speech, endless punishment for imagined crimes. You criticize yourself before anyone else can. You apologize for things no one noticed. You live as both citizen and dictator, punishing yourself to maintain order. Machiavelli would call it genius, the perfect self-sustaining government. Because a person who rules themselves with fear never needs to be ruled from outside. You might think that fear fades when you gain success or approval, but it doesn't. It only changes costume. When you get what you want, anxiety shifts from what if I fail, to what if I lose it. Fear evolves faster than your achievements. It feeds on your growth, because growth means uncertainty, and uncertainty is fear's home turf. That's why some people sabotage themselves right at the edge of success. They mistake peace for danger, calmness for emptiness. Because without anxiety, they don't know who they are. Power, on the other hand, knows exactly who it is, and that's why it wins. Machiavelli understood that control isn't sustained by punishment, it's sustained by expectation. Make people anticipate reward or rejection, and they'll regulate themselves endlessly. That's how anxiety works. It's the internalization of expectation. You imagine disapproval before it arrives. You feel guilt before anyone accuses you. You rehearse failure before you even try. That anticipation loop becomes a behavioral leash, and every manipulator knows how to pull it. That's why they withhold answers, why they delay affection, why they leave you uncertain. Because uncertainty breeds anxiety, and anxiety breeds compliance. Let's go deeper. The human brain craves prediction. It would rather know something terrible is coming than live in uncertainty. That's why anxiety clings to worst-case scenarios, because at least they're predictable. Fear trades freedom for certainty. It tells you, if I imagine the worst, I can't be surprised. But that illusion of safety becomes a trap. Machiavelli would call this the citizen's bargain, the trade of freedom for protection. You do the same trading peace of mind for the comfort of control. You live in constant alertness, believing that vigilance is safety. But what you're really doing is rehearsing submission. Here's the cruel brilliance of it. You can't outthink anxiety, because anxiety is thought amplified, distorted, recursive. The more you analyze it, the deeper it buries you. That's why control addicts never find peace, they just find better distractions. And that's why true power feels like detachment, not dominance. To detach isn't to stop caring, it's to stop chasing certainty. It's to let fear exist without serving it. That's the mental discipline Machiavelli hinted at, but never lived long enough to name. The art of psychological sovereignty. Every manipulator, every leader, every algorithm that preys on attention, they all depend on one thing: your inability to tolerate uncertainty. The second you can stand still inside the unknown, you become uncontrollable. Fear loses leverage when it can't make you move. Anxiety loses meaning when you stop treating comfort as truth. That's when the hierarchy flips. The one who once obeyed fear begins to study it. And once you study fear, you strip it of mystery. Power only lives in what you don't understand. Machiavelli's world was ruled by kings. Yours is ruled by chemistry. The throne has shifted from marble to neurons, but the politics are the same. Fear commands. You comply. And every thought you don't question becomes law. But when you finally question the ruler, when you ask, "Who profits from my panic?" that's when the empire begins to tremble. Because fear only rules those who still believe its protection. Machiavelli believed that control begins where fear is mastered, not erased. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But what if that fear is inward your own? What if the ruler and the subject both live inside you? Then the question changes. Do you rule your fear, or does your fear rule you? Here's the paradox: most never face fear isn't your enemy. It's your most loyal spy. It warns you. It watches others. It records weakness. But when you misinterpret its signals, you turn that spy into a dictator. Anxiety isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to keep you alive. It just doesn't understand that survival and power are no longer the same thing. Machiavelli would smirk at that. He'd call it a primitive state of governance, because when you live ruled by instinct, you're a citizen of your past, not a creator of your future. Fear has memory. It remembers the betrayals, the rejections, the moments your voice trembled and you wished it hadn't. It replays them not to torture you, but to remind you that danger once existed. But here's the secret. Fear can't distinguish between history and prophecy. It warns you of ghosts as if they were armies. And the anxious obey. You carry your memories like border guards, scanning every new opportunity for resemblance to old pain. That's how power keeps you small, by disguising memory as wisdom. But wisdom isn't remembering what hurt you. It's learning how not to flinch when it returns. Machiavelli would call this strategic coldness. He admired leaders who felt everything but revealed nothing, who could sense threat without reacting to it. That's the next evolution of fear. When you no longer serve it, but study it, you become the observer, not the subject. You feel anxiety rise like smoke, but instead of inhaling it, you trace its source. Where did it begin? What triggered it? Whose voice does it sound like? That's not repression. That's reconnaissance. Because every time you name your fear, you strip it of mystery. And mystery is where fear hides its power. Here's the reversal Machiavelli would teach if he lived now. Don't fight fear. Redirect it. When you fear failure, let that energy sharpen preparation. When you fear rejection, let that tension refine authenticity. When you fear loss, let that awareness deepen presence. Fear is neutral. It's the mind's electricity. The only difference between panic and precision is direction. Machiavelli knew that panic in a ruler destroys kingdoms. But precision, the ability to feel fear and still act, builds empires. The calm you envy in powerful people isn't natural. It's trained. They still feel fear. They've just domesticated it. They've learned to make it work for them. They don't chase safety. They chase control, not over others, but over their reactions. Because once you control your reactions, others' power evaporates. Fear feeds on immediacy. It needs you to respond instantly to prove your prey. But when you pause, when you do nothing, you starve it. That silence isn't weakness. It's execution. Because silence creates space, and space creates dominance. Machiavelli observed that rulers who panicked lost thrones faster than those who hesitated. He saw that hesitation, when deliberate, becomes strategy. So when you feel anxiety rising, your instinct is to act to fix, explain, please, or prove. But what if you did nothing? What if you let fear speak, but refuse to obey? That's the pivot when obedience turns into observation. When panic becomes analysis. You begin to see that the same physiological surge that once made you avoid danger can make you command presence. Adrenaline is neutral. Direction gives it meaning. The difference between a coward and a strategist is what they do with their heartbeat. Machiavelli would call this weaponized composure. It's the state where you're no longer hiding your anxiety, you're mastering it. You walk into rooms knowing your fear is still there, but now it's under orders. That's when people start to misread you. They see calm, not realizing it's disciplined fear. They sense authority, not realizing it's controlled chaos. Because fear that doesn't escape your face becomes magnetism. And people are drawn to what they can't read. Here's the cruel beauty of this reversal. When you stop fearing fear, others begin to fear your silence. You've inverted the power dynamic. The manipulator who once thrived on your tension now meets uncertainty. They can't predict your reaction. They can't extract reassurance. They can't feed on your anxiety because it no longer leaks. You've turned emotion into camouflage. Machiavelli would have smiled at that, because now you've become the strategist. There's a quiet kind of dominance that comes from internal stillness. It's not loud, it doesn't argue. It just observes, calculates, and responds on its own terms. When you no longer react to emotional pressure, you become the one who applies it. You understand timing. You understand restraint. And you understand that control doesn't mean force. It means the ability to delay. Fear wants immediacy. Power prefers patience. So, the next time anxiety strikes, remember this. The body's panic is just energy looking for a master. Don't waste it on worry. Redirect it into command. Because the calm you seek isn't the absence of fear, it's the orchestration of it. And when you reach that level of mastery, when fear becomes instrument, not enemy, you begin to feel something few ever do. The quiet intoxication of self-command. That's when Machiavelli's ghost would whisper, "Now, you've become the prince." Power doesn't appear in the moment you stop being afraid. It appears in the moment fear stops being sacred. You used to treat it like a god, praying to it through worry, sacrificing peace for the illusion of safety. But gods die the day you stop kneeling. And tonight, your fear kneels to you. Machiavelli would have recognized this posture, the quiet arrogance of self-control. He called it virtù, the strength to shape fate instead of waiting for it. Here's what they don't tell you. You don't heal from fear. You outgrow its influence. It's still there, whispering, calculating, waiting. But you've learned its language. And once you understand the dialect of fear, it can no longer manipulate you. That's how true strategists are born. Not through confidence, but through comprehension. You begin to notice the small pauses between emotion and action. Those milliseconds of power where choice lives. That's where sovereignty hides. Every anxious thought, every nervous impulse, it all passes through that narrow gate. And most people never see it. They live as if feeling and reacting are the same thing, but they're not. One belongs to instinct. The other belongs to you. Machiavelli would have written this in a letter to princes. If he'd lived in your time, a ruler who masters reaction becomes a god among men. Because emotion is universal, but control is divine. And divinity, in modern terms, isn't holiness. It's precision. You've seen how fear commands the world, through hesitation, through compliance, through emotional chaos. But when you stop participating in that economy, when you stop spending energy on imaginary threats, you exit the marketplace of control. And that's the moment people start to look at you differently. They can't predict you. They can't provoke you. They can't guilt you. Because the manipulator's greatest weapon, your anxiety, has turned against them. Now, silence becomes your armor. Not the silence of submission, the silence of command. It's the stillness that unsettles people because it reveals nothing. Fear used to make you over-explain. Now, you say less and it carries more. You've learned that words were never your problem. Access was. And access is the currency of control. Every time you explain yourself, you hand over access. Every time you justify yourself, you give away your center. So you stop. You stop defending, stop proving, stop chasing approval. And the world, deprived of your anxious energy, starts to orbit around your quiet. Machiavelli would have called that the final disguise of power, appearing detached while quietly orchestrating everything. There's a strange calm that comes with this understanding. It feels like grief, at first, the death of an old self. The version of you that needed to be liked, needed to be safe. needed to be seen. But once that self dies, something colder rises. Something patient. Something that doesn't flinch when tested. This isn't apathy. It's clarity. You stop reacting to how people make you feel and start responding to what they reveal. That's how rulers think. And make no mistake, you are ruling now, not others, yourself. Fear used to dictate your tone, your timing, your decisions. Now, it merely advises. You listen, but you no longer obey. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "Fortune favors the bold," not the reckless, the composed. Because boldness isn't aggression, it's self-trust under pressure. And here's the final secret. The world bends not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who can stay still the longest. When fear runs through the room, people scatter. But the one who stands motionless, who lets it pass, becomes the axis. Everything else rotates around them. Fear's greatest deception was convincing you it was permanent. But permanence was never its nature, only repetition. You kept reliving it because you kept responding the same way. Change the response, and the entire empire collapses. You don't fight fear. You rewrite its script. You let it speak, and then you choose silence instead. And in that silence, power accumulates quietly, invisibly, like gravity. People start to feel it when they're near you. They can't name it, but they respect it. Because composure feels like dominance to the untrained mind. Machiavelli knew this centuries ago, that power isn't performance. It's presence. Now, anxiety doesn't betray you to power. It reports to you. It's your scout, not your master. And the same energy that once paralyzed you now warns you when others try to manipulate you. You start seeing motives instead of moods. You start detecting games before they begin. You start recognizing that fear was never your flaw, it was your untrained intelligence. And when intelligence becomes disciplined, it becomes influence. That's when you stop surviving and start orchestrating. You are no longer the anxious. You are the strategist, the one who studies silence, decodes emotion, and understands the geometry of control. Fear still whispers, but now it waits for orders. Machiavelli would have called that evolution. You'll call it peace. Machiavelli once said, "The one who adapts to the times will survive them." But he never imagined times like these where thrones are invisible and wars are fought inside the human nervous system. You don't wear armor now. You wear composure. You don't carry weapons. You carry restraint. And you don't conquer land, you conquer response. That's the new art of power. The war without blood. Anxiety was never the villain. It was the messenger. It warned you that something sacred had been misplaced, your command, over your own perception. You kept trying to silence the messenger instead of understanding the message. But now you see it. Fear doesn't mean stop. It means observe. You no longer ask, "How do I get rid of fear?" You ask, "What is fear showing me about control?" And in that shift, everything changes. Machiavelli would have called you dangerous now, not because you're cruel, but because you're unpredictable. You no longer react on cue. You no longer feed systems that thrive on panic. You've reclaimed your most valuable asset, attention, because control isn't taken by force. It's taken by focus. And once your focus returns home, no one else owns your fear. That's when power stops being pursuit and becomes presence. You've probably noticed it already, the way silence feels different now. It used to feel like emptiness. Now, it feels like dominion. People speak differently around you. They hesitate before crossing boundaries. They sense the invisible barrier, not of arrogance, but awareness. That's the aura of someone who no longer bargains with anxiety. Someone who has seen the inner machinery of fear and decided to use it as architecture instead of a cage. There's an old Italian phrase Machiavelli used: "Col tempo e con la paglia maturano le nespole." With time and patience, the medlars ripen. He meant that mastery requires stillness, that you cannot rush power. Fear made you impatient. It made you mistake urgency for purpose. But now, you understand the deeper law. Nothing that is truly powerful ever hurries. Even silence takes its time to echo. So you move slower now, not because you're cautious, but because you're deliberate. You speak less, but every word lands like a verdict. You no longer chase reassurance because your certainty isn't external anymore. It lives beneath the noise, quiet, immovable, sovereign. You've become what fear was designed to prevent: uncontrollable. And that's why people sense something different in you now. Something they can't manipulate, only respect. Machiavelli would have written a chapter about you if he could. He would have said, "There exists a new kind of ruler, one who governs the self before governing others." And that's who you are now. You've dethroned fear. You've turned anxiety into a counsel, not a command. And in doing so, you've become what every manipulator fears most: a mind that no longer obeys invisible masters. So when fear returns, and it will, you won't resist it. You'll watch it. You'll study it. You'll let it remind you that control is not a gift, it's a practice. Because the truth is, fear never leaves. It just changes rank. And now, it serves you. Machiavelli would nod, maybe even smile, and say, "Now you understand the art of rule." And as the candlelight fades on his parchment, and the echoes of your heartbeat return to silence, one truth remains: power doesn't shout. It watches, it waits, and it always remembers.